Hello and welcome to the Unique CPA with your host, Randy Crabtree. We're committed to creating a thriving community of accounting professionals who are physically and mentally healthy, fulfilled, and energized by their work. Our ultimate goal is to elevate the reputation of the accounting profession and vastly improve the lives of those in it. The Unique CPA is brought to you by Tri-Merit, the specialty tax professionals.
Today's guest is Dominic Piscopo. Dom is founder of Big Four Transparency and the host of the Big Four Transparency podcast, which I was a guest on in the past, which was a lot of fun.
An early pivotal guest.
It was an early pivotal guest. Oh, wow. I get pivotal. That's pretty awesome. Thanks for that. In just 4 years, he's built a crowdsourced pay database of over 20,000 records and has become the place that's amazing. 300,000 professionals go to for compensation data. Dom, welcome to the Unique CPA.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure being here. And, you've given me some opportunities to speak in the past, including Bridging the Gap, which I appreciate as well. So yeah, thank you for everything, Randy.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that. It was pretty cool having you at Bridging the Gap. We did a couple things there. You were on our lunchtime survey data release panel with Seth and Hank, and you had some great insights to add to that. So I appreciate that. And then you were on another panel. What was that panel you were on?
It was a very confusing layout, but I was super happy with how it went. But it was like return on relationships, and I was kind of representing the return on investing in the relationships that you have with your employees, both financially and like from a kind of lifestyle respect perspective. So we did return on relationships with that, return on relationships with your clients, which is Rory's kind of area of expertise. And then we kind of looked at an operations lens as well with Ashley.
Yeah, that's right. I did. I jumped in there for a while and saw what you guys were doing. That was pretty cool. It was fun. It was a powerhouse panel there. So thanks for doing that. All right, so let's get into this today because this is pretty cool what you're doing, and I'm still learning about it. So it's the fun part about this podcast is I get to learn as I talk to people. So let's just go into the whole. Obviously, I know there's a database. I know it's pay data, but before we even get to like the mechanics of it and everything, just the origin story, the history. How did this come about, and what was that need you saw out there?
Yeah, for sure. From the get-go, I was probably a little bit of a rambunctious CPA. I was working at Deloitte in tax. Pay kind of right off the start for me was a bit of a sticking point. So throughout university, I was making a lot of money as a university student. My first summer before university, I'd done credit card sales. I was working at a very, very trendy bar where I could do quite well. I was DJing weddings and special events. And so I was kind of like going into this career, right, as a co-op student being like, oh my God, I've made it. This is cool. And I kind of found myself making less doing that than any of those other things I had been doing. And that really freaked me out in a pretty big way. And honestly, like I had a great team. I liked the work. It was interesting. Pay was a huge sticking point. And it was like kind of a crushing thing. When I got my full-time offer, I was actually like really, really freaked out. And I'm in Canada for comparison's sake as well.
We can hear.
Where salaries for CPAs are quite a bit lower. And so, I was kind of really freaked out about that. So I was always kind of pushing the envelope of that. And eventually I actually found out that we had fallen behind what the starting offers were for basically everyone else in the city. I found that out just by asking everyone sort of pen and paper. And I actually presented that to the managing partner who, to his credit, he really took that seriously, brought it up the chain, and we actually got an adjustment to our whole cohort. So we got a pretty decent percentage-wise salary increase. And I kind of realized like, hey, like comp information and advocating for yourself and, just knowing what's out there is super important. And I was at one of the places like where they're the most on top of that, right? Like the big firms with the big resources, they have people who are kind of monitoring that. And I was like, it still kind of fell through the cracks. And it wasn't even an intentional thing. Like as soon as they realized we were under market, they were like, oh my God, we need to address this.
Wow.
Which again, like a huge shout out to the partner in question for being open-minded and not taking
that's cool.
the wrong way and actually having a real discussion about it. And so that was always in the back of my mind. So I stayed at Deloitte for a couple of years. And then after I left, I was working as a controller for a small startup with actually quite a famous entrepreneur where I'm from. And the job was not for me at all. But I started getting kind of inspired and really interested into the world of entrepreneurship. The no-code movement was picking up at the time, which is like the ability to build all these kind of tools and websites as a non-technical person. So I was kind of just looking at like, what can I build that people actually kind of need or will want? Because a huge issue is people build these exceptionally cool things and they just kind of launch them into the void and then they never get used. So I was like, okay, no business plan, but I just want to build something people are going to use. And on Reddit, I was always seeing these discussions, Reddit and Fishbowl, of like, hey, am I underpaid? And there would be a bunch of responses that like weren't necessarily one-to-one comparable. And then those discussions would just disappear, right? And it would be the next day, there'd be a new thread of like, hey, am I underpaid? And so it's like, this seems like something we should really just centralize. And instead of having all these one-off discussions, why don't we put it all into a database? And so I built that. It was kind of just a weekend project. And it got some pretty decent traction right off the bat from people on those platforms. And then ultimately what kind of really, really, really kicked things off was a month or two in, some people had tried to access it from their networks at work and found that the website was blocked. So some people kind of like shared that was the case. And that seems to have kicked off a real nerve and like, you know, a sense of like us versus them, which is never actually what I wanted out of this website. I just was like, let's build a cool tool. But that fueled this like urgency of like, we need to do something about this. And so that really blew it up. And it was at a point after that happened, like I'd log into the spreadsheet, there'd be like 80, 100 people concurrently in this spreadsheet looking at data. And I was like, wow, okay, we have something here. And for about a year and a half after that, maybe 2 years, I just kind of maintained this as like a community tool, free access. There was no means of monetization. I had literally no idea what to do about it as a business either. And then, you know, there's a critical mass reached and there was enough people coming to the site that I was like, okay, let's try a couple things. So there was a job board, which I eventually killed off, newsletter. And then I started having firms reaching out to me asking like, hey, can we download this? Are there ways that we can manipulate the data that might be more effective? And so that was kind of the obvious signal to me that I should start building some tools around this. And so, yeah, we started off with a very small firm out of Quebec, was my first client ever. Brandon Hall, whose firm later came on as an investor, was an early supporter of this. And then like my third or fourth client ever was one of the big four.
Wow, that's a pretty good get.
Yeah. And so when I onboarded the big four, I was like, whoa, like this has now become a real business. I have to pay obscene insurance premiums to get this crazy business insurance to be able to work with this big of a firm at their request. And I was like, well, I'm already paying this much for this crazy business insurance. Let's try and keep this ball rolling. Let's like, you know, like now I have kind of the structure in place. And so since then, I've been working on it. In September of 2024, I was actually able to leave my job. I did a very small fundraise to kind of help support me, bridge that gap of where I needed to be financially to work on this full time. And yeah, haven't really looked back since. And then we launched the podcast just because I realized I wasn't connected to people in the community. And I was in the kind of big four silo for sure when I was there. These big firms have so many resources and they're exceptional that you basically don't ever look outside of what they're feeding you.
Right.
And so you really lack the broader understanding of the industry. And so the podcast helped me kind of understand like, oh, this is actually what's going on in accounting. So yeah, that's been my journey so far.
Yeah, and the podcast, since you're bringing that up, that you've had a lot of really good guests. I'm not saying that just because I was on it, but every time I see it, another post out there, it's like, wow, so you've really ingrained yourself into this community outside of the big four where you were siloed. Are there episodes that really, helped you, I guess, with this business that really fueled the growth, the passion, or just memorable episodes you had?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a few. So, I mean, Brandon Hall, initially, he was a client and I brought him onto the pod as an early guest. And that one helped me get a lot of traction because he's a pretty big name and people really like to hear what he's got to say. And that kind of started this ladder of like, when you ask someone to be on your podcast, I'm sure you get requests all the time. It's kind of like, oh, is this like a serious podcast? Like, is this going to get listened to 3 times or whatever? And so it'd be like, hey, we've had guests like Brandon Hall. And then later it becomes, we've had Randy Crabtree, we've had Frank Longobardi, and you can kind of keep booking exceptional guests because you've had these exceptional guests. And it's like a proof of concept that like it's worth your time to come on this podcast. So that was really helpful. The episode I did with you was super helpful, genuinely, because I feel like it kind of unlocked this world for me of like, I didn't know all the things you had going on. I didn't know all the things like, Seth Feinberg had going on. And it was kind of like, oh, you're in this little bubble now, and you can kind of like be more meaningfully connected to these people and get involved in the things that they've got going on as well. Those were big ones. And then there's a few that like really opened my mind to firms and like how actually interesting that is as like a business model. Like I say this sometimes, I could see a next chapter for me being to start a firm one day. But like I had a couple of people that I managed to catch in the first like 3 months of starting their new firms and talk to them all about that. That was really, really cool, actually. And I found really interesting. And then expanding the horizons even beyond like, you don't just need to do accounting. So I had Craig House on, who does accounting plus like wealth advisory.
Right.
Then I spoke with Rory and like an increasing number in that space. And you're like, oh, like accounting can actually even just like can be a wedge into other business opportunities as well. And so it's been really cool. A lot of these episodes, I learn a significant amount of things about accounting.
Nice. Well, let's go back into Big Four transparency, because I've got a lot of questions about that. It's crowdsourced.
Yeah.
So the data you get, where you get the data, and then what data do you collect? I'm guessing there's multiple things that you ask about, right?
Yeah, it's a ton of things. Yeah, so the way I built the flow of submissions, it's like completely anonymous, right? The test was if someone gave me $1 million to hunt down who put something into this, would I be able to find them? And I wanted the answer to be no. So there's like a whole cycle that like removes the trace of the Google account of who put it in, and everything gets like registered under my Google account basically, and then is submitted to this. And basically I've changed this a little bit. At the beginning, it was just like, go to the website, here's a link to the spreadsheet. Now I go to the website, you can kind of view it a certain way, but if you want like the full view access, you need to make a submission. So we collect the data that way, is like just from having all of this data, people want to see it in their chosen format versus just the like built-in search functionality on the site. And being accountants, that format's generally, they want to see a big old spreadsheet of everything and just filter it that way. And so it's kind of been like that. And there's a lot of people who might be quite informed independently of compensation, and they just want to share on here to kind of help drive the profession forward, help people advocate for themselves, help people understand. And again, like I never want this to be like an oppositional thing. I don't want this to be like, oh, he's exposing the secrets of the accounting firms. It's like, no, like I think it's good for everyone. Like I've kind of jokingly used this line before, but like, get more partners on jet skis. Like, let me see that the pursuit of that is worthwhile. Right. And like, I can do the math. Like, I'm a CPA. I can do the math of like, does this actually pay off? Is it worth the long hours? Is it worth like maybe the lower starting pay? Is it worth it? And so I think having clarity on this stuff actually only benefits literally everyone on all sides of this. So
yeah, I agree. So the transparency aspect of the name and what you were just saying, I think we are so bad as a profession of showing what it means to be a partner, not just from the work side of things, but from the pay, because the pay can be very large.
Yeah.
And I don't think most people understand that. I mean, we're not talking, you probably know better than me, but in larger firms, having pay over $1 million a year is not, unheard of, and it's probably common in a lot of places. So
yeah, it's absolutely possible for sure.
So let's go back to the data real quick. So these people are anonymous. You're not getting names or anything.
Yeah.
Is the only thing going in salary, or is there additional information?
Yeah. So that's evolved over time as well. But yeah, no, there's a lot of fields. Like we try to be quite selective and make sure it won't take you more than 2.5 minutes to fill this thing out, because otherwise there's a pretty big drop off rate. But yeah, salary, bonus, with the advent of like ESOPs in firms, we started collecting data on equity grants as well, whether people are in office or remote or hybrid, which has been really interesting to look at like industry trends. So for example, over the last 2 years, full in office has overtaken remote roles. So remote roles are actually like on the decline quite significantly, being replaced basically entirely by fully in office roles, whereas hybrid has been steady. We have whether this person's an internally promoted employee or an external hire, which is like one of my favorite topics that I harp on. But with that, we can look at trends of the loyalty tax. So there's this phenomenon in the accounting industry that's a big lose-lose for everyone, in my opinion, where you can get paid a lot more if you leave firms. I think that all boils down to not having confidence in the data that you're using, which obviously is a great sales angle for me. But I think ultimately, like, this is a really bad thing where you're willing to take candidate feedback or pushback or whatever that is during the hiring process and increase their salary. But then what happens is they're going to become very dissatisfied over the next 2 to 3 years as you try to bring them back into salary band, and they get really bad raises over the next little bit. Other employees who are working at your firm who've been loyal employees are probably going to find out about that and be upset about it. This all comes from, you're adjusting salaries as part of the hiring process, but you're not keeping up with market salaries internally. That's a huge issue for retention. And so, the employee find themselves underpaid, and the incentive is for them to leave, which is bad for them. And it's bad for your firm because you're losing great talent who might otherwise be completely happy. And these aren't like small spreads. Like it's like 10.5% for a first year manager or something like that. And at a certain point, you're like, hey, like, at the stage of life you're at as a manager, it's like, maybe I'm looking at buying a house. Maybe I'm looking at getting married. Maybe I'm looking at this or that. And like, hey, like an extra 15 grand a year in my pocket, like, I might be willing to just leave this place that I otherwise love for that. And then in the process, firms are bleeding money through recruiter fees. They're losing money through training. And I think training and the cost of change, I think, is probably just increasing because tech is playing a much larger role in firms. So when you change from one tech stack to the other, it's not just that you're filling out the same form in both places. It's like, no, there's a whole process flow you got to learn. You have to get used to that. And so I think the whole industry would benefit a lot from, more confidence in your numbers and kind of reducing that loyalty tax. But the trend is that it's actually just been increasing.
Has it really? Yeah. I mean, because I've talked about this before, but we don't have much turnover in our organization. Yeah. And I don't know if we, specifically do what you're saying, just make sure that the salaries are in range. I think it comes down to the culture aspect of things as well.
Yeah.
But the positive aspect of it is that the cost of turnover is outrageous. And
it's huge, yeah.
To be able to keep somebody and, you may have to up their salaries to be in line with what they get somewhere else. But if they're happy there and that's the only reason they're leaving, there's no reason. The cost to you as an employer is going to be a lot less than replacing that person. So getting that in line, that alone, I'm subscribing today. Give me the subscription code. I'm going there.
Perfect. Yeah. I mean, and we've spoken in the past, right? Like your firm's a little bit different where it's like, well, I can support you on the accounting side, but you hire a lot of non-accountants, which is a little bit tricky because again, that's the beauty and the drawback of being like such a niche offering is like, I want to know what to pay like my salespeople. And like, that's something we might work on in the future, but like, I want to be exceptional at the accounting part of it.
Yes.
And so we've really prioritized that.
So let's go, and I'm glad you brought up that loyalty tax because that is a big deal. And if you can solve that, and if you can fix that for firms, that'll be huge.
Yeah.
But let's go back into now. We got the data from the employees.
Yeah.
One question on that because it is all anonymous. How do you verify the accuracy of what's being put in?
Yeah, there's kind of like that's where I talk about the critical mass of data, right? Is like. Yep. You need a lot of data to be able to trust crowdsourced entries. And once you have a very large corpus of data, it's possible to and we do this before we push any of the data to firms, but we subject it to statistical analysis. Anything that's like beyond a certain range in terms of being an outlier, we'll remove. And, we try to explain the outliers. Like, for example, like for tax, like people with a JD are their own category.
Okay.
Because you'll have like a tax analyst making 115,000 and you're like, I don't know about that. And then every time you look, they have a JD and you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And so, right, once you have enough data, you can actually do quite in-depth analysis on it to validate it. And most people are truthful just on account of like, you can look at this data without making a submission. I think that's a huge mistake some of these crowdsourced platforms make, is that they'll like unlock this by making a submission. And it's like, well, I'm just going to punch in whatever. Mm-hmm. So for us, like there is an opt-out where you don't have to share your data. And so that's a huge help already. And then because we have so much data, we're able to kind of go through and be like, okay, this one like doesn't really make sense. Whether it's real or not, it's not going to be helpful to people to look at this. So we're going to remove it, things like that. And then a lot of work goes into like standardizing everything as well. Because we wanted this to be inclusive to people at smaller firms or like smaller communities and things like that. And so you can't just have a drop down of like, what's your firm name?
Right.
And so like, you'll get KPMG LLP, KPMG tax group, and you have to standardize all of that to keep the data searchable. So definitely a lot of work goes into like maintaining this database for it to continue to be usable and helpful. But yeah, once you have enough data, you can really subject it to analysis and remove
Makes sense.
Makes data points. Yeah.
Okay. And so the people that are putting their data in, there's no fee to them to do this, right?
No.
Okay.
No. So everything's free from a user perspective. And that to me kind of feels like my duty back to the community, right? Is like without the accountants who are willing to share to build up this database. And it's like, I'm like, this will be whatever we make it to be. Without that, there's nothing. And so I think like when I mentioned I had done a fundraise last year, some people were kind of like, oh, you just paywall this and then like this will be a huge revenue generator. And I was like, I can't do that. And like that was kind of the end of the discussion. Mm-hmm. They were like, well, we'd be interested in investing if you're willing to do that. And I was like, well, that's okay. On to the next. Because that's like a hard stop for me because it's like, yeah, I kind of owe it to the community to help them. I've just facilitated this. Like I'm not the only reason this exists. It's very much a community effort.
Yep. Okay. So, but you are doing this as a living now. So there has to be revenue somewhere. How does that end of things work? I assume firms subscribe to the data. Give us more information on that.
Yeah. I mean, so there is an advertising element on the newsletter. We have about 7,500 readers. The podcast has sponsors as well, most of the time, not all the time, but we try to.
Well, look at you. I haven't had a sponsor. Well, Trey Merritt's the sponsor of this podcast, but well, that's pretty cool. All right.
Sorry, I've had some really great recurring, super supportive sponsors, which has been awesome. And then in terms of monetization through the data and through the platform, you can open this spreadsheet and then we have this thing called temporary filters that you can do to access like the information you're looking at. But like you can't generate a report or you can't like download the data and do like super in-depth analytics of your own, which is essentially what I share on the newsletter. Like I'll do the analytics for the people and I'll share it that way. But like you have limited access on that front. And that's kind of a paid subscription for firms. And so when they subscribe, they get access to this dashboard that sits on top of the data that's not otherwise available, that like makes navigating the data super easy. So you just select what you want in terms of a sample to be benchmarked on, and then it'll kind of auto update all of the tables, all of the charts to give you the 25th, 50th, 75th, 90th percentile of every range of experience. And then you just select what stream you want to look at, what time period, what geography. And then it'll basically do the work for you of setting up your broad salary ranges. And then from there, you can go, okay, now give me first years of each level. Now give me second year. Now give me third year of each level. And it makes it a lot easier. So if I'm an individual and I'm like, hey, I'm in Parsippany, New Jersey, and I want to understand what I should be paid, the temporary filters are enough because you can then go in and look. But if you're like, hey, I'm a firm and I want to understand what's going on in the market, it's going to be challenging, intentionally so. And so these tools help. You also get access to the raw data in a downloadable format, so you can do your own kind of in-depth analysis on it. And then there's the talent pool. So because so many accountants come to the site, we're kind of like, I've hated the recruitment process in my experience. Like, it just feels like recruiters calling me, trying to convince me that I'll never do better than this role they're offering that's like not at all what I'm looking for and maybe has terrible compensation. So I kind of flipped that model on its head. I said, why don't we just fill out this other spreadsheet? Basically, it's an intake form and it just says like, what would you be willing to leave your job for, essentially? And they fill in a bunch of fields, takes about a minute. And I have about 450 candidates in there as well. And we basically cross-search that against opportunities with the firms that we're working with. And we will only contact the person if we have a match. So if we have something that matches all of the criteria they've put in, and then we'll charge a 6% placement fee if the hire is successful. So that's also kind of a part of how we monetize this as well. So like when the PwC layoffs happened, there were a ton of people coming to the website for that. And we were able to make some good introductions on that front. A lot of them didn't necessarily result in a hire, but the whole point of this is like no obligations deal flow, and you'll only pay if it works.
Right.
So that's part of it as well. Yeah.
Nice. All right. So then obviously there's going to be more benefits out there than I've already asked you about. So what else are you seeing? Are there things that you're seeing this type of data help out there in the field?
Yeah. Well, so one of the biggest things about wiping out that information asymmetry, where historically these kind of HR tools have only been accessible on the employer side, right? But because employers can access this and the employees are already accessing, some version of it with the same data you're looking at, there can be a lot more alignment of expectations, which I think can lead to much better discussions when it comes to performance evaluations and compensation time. So I've actually written about this, but like to me in the past, compensation discussions have usually just been like an upsetting thing by all accounts, where here's what we're giving you, and it's just kind of like in a vacuum, and I'm like, well, I'm not happy about that number, and it just kind of like ends there, where it's like, I'm not happy about it, they're worried that I'm going to leave, versus if that discussion can take a different shape of like, hey, here's what we're offering you, we've done the homework, this is at the 75th percentile, then the discussion becomes, if someone's not happy about it, okay, but I think I'm a 99th percentile employee. Like, let's talk about that, right? Like,
Yep.
There might be this disconnect in how I view my performance and how you view it. Is there something that I'm not communicating properly to you? Are there weaknesses in what I'm bringing to the table that I should be working on between now and the next time we revisit my compensation that might get me to that point I want to be? Or again, like, here's what we're offering you that finds you roughly at the 50th percentile or the 40th percentile. And then it's like, if the conversation just ends at the number, you might not be uncovering certain things. Whereas if it's like, hey, here's how we're benchmarking you, it's around the 40th percentile. It's like, okay, like that's not where I want to be. Are there things, again, I need to be working on? Is this a company performance issue? Are there things that I can spend time on that might be a bigger driver of value to the company and can justify me moving up that scale? But there needs to be that mutual trust and understanding of like, this is actually where you stand in the order of things, of like relevant samples of salaries to you. And I think that can drive much better, much more productive discussions rather than, here's your number, I'm not happy about this, I might leave, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So.
All right. So at the beginning, we did talk about the panel we had at lunchtime at Bridging the Gap, where we were sharing data that we've collected, but you had some amazing data that you were able to share. Do you actually do a survey to collect that, or is that data you're collecting already through this process of crowdsourcing?
Yeah, so pretty much everything is based off of what I'm already collecting on crowdsourcing. And sometimes you need that kind of inspiration or like this spin on what you've collected to, result that in being like an actual finding, right? So again, the loyalty tax stuff took a bit of digging, but I was kind of like, as I was going through the data, I just noticed like these external promotions seem to be making more, which is kind of odd. Or like they seem to be an outlier when compared to the overall population. But then amongst themselves, they're all consistently high. And that's where you can kind of find these conclusions essentially from digging a little bit deeper in the data. So I actually this morning just had something come to me that I was like, oh, I'm going to look at. And that is the industry pay bump dead. So when I left the accounting firm I was at for an industry role, I got like a 40-ish% increase in salary at the time. But public accounting salaries have moved up pretty massively in the interim. And I feel like industry salaries have maybe stagnated. So we collect a little bit of data on industry roles as well for accountants. And so you can kind of cross-reference those and come to those sort of findings of like, oh, interesting. Yeah, you used to be able to jump as a senior to industry for 40% pay bump. That's actually maybe now 15%. And like it actually makes a lot more sense now to stick it out in public accounting and things like that, right? And so that's what's really nice about collecting like a wide array of data. And as things change, you start collecting new fields. So we had a client come on who specifically recommended that we should start collecting data on billable hour targets for the year. Because they're like, well, we feel like we're really good on this front, but we're not 100% sure. And our compensation philosophy is we're going to pay maybe around the 50th percentile. Like we're not going to be excessively competitive on pay, but we're pretty sure that we put much lower demands on employees. But we need the data to be able to kind of like hypothesize that or like to like prove that out properly, right? And so again, that's what's nice about having very rich data is that you can kind of go in and sample these. I have done a couple like one-off survey polls on the newsletter, but it's like, it's kind of tough to find like strong conclusions if you have like 100 responses or whatever that might be.
Right.
So what's nice is when you're on an ongoing basis collecting all these fields, at face value, it might not seem like there's that much you can do, but I've actually done probably like 25 deep dives on this of like, what's going on, right? Or like as fields maybe even take shape, like as all these private equity deals are happening, I might have a before and after picture of the firm who did the private equity deal. And I can go, did salaries move up considerably? Did bonuses change? Did the hours work change? Did job satisfaction change? Right. And so you can kind of create these things. And that's where like the podcast has been super valuable too, is like idea generation, because someone will throw out this theory when I'm talking to them. Be like, private equity is bad because, and I'm like, like, I wonder if that's true. And I've done the analysis, for example, on private equity, and it's like, the numbers are actually really not that bad. Like the hours are like, I think it was like 2% higher. The job satisfaction was like 2% lower, but like the pay increased at a higher rate at most levels. So it's like, this might actually like be a much more nuanced story than we think. So it's basically, as people throw out these kind of claims or theories, it's really fun to then just be like, oh, I'm going to make that a newsletter topic and I'm going to actually do the deep dive on the data that we collect. And every once in a while, there's going to be a super interesting theory thrown out that I maybe don't have the field for. And so that sometimes is where you go like, maybe I'll start collecting this data point. So, yeah.
Well, I've got one that we did in our survey this year that we didn't do in the first year, but I think I could dig deeper into that as well. And that's on having a niche practice. And we did it based on what it determined satisfaction levels. Were people happier if they get to concentrate on a specific niche? And what we found out is that not surprisingly to me, because my thesis was it did increase satisfaction levels, and it did quite a bit. People are much happier when that happened. But what we didn't do is when you have this niche expertise, are you more valuable from a firm standpoint than a salary standpoint? More. So I'm curious, is that something that you've dug into at all or thought about?
So I might be able to do that to a degree if I really like dug into like the substream data that we collect. It would be like a difficult analysis to run, or if there were enough firms that I knew that like this firm will have employees in a niche area specifically versus this firm doesn't.
Like Brandon Hall, that would be.
Yeah, so I could split it up that way and just basically be like, these are all of the firms in the real estate space.
Right.
Are people on average making more money there? Are they happier? Are they working more or less? That's something I could do for sure. And that's the thing is like, there's a million ways to chop this up, right? It's not obvious on just on its face, but you can dig really, really deep and find these things. So
yeah.
Interesting thing. That would be tricky to pull off, but I might see if I can dig into that a little bit.
Nice. Yeah. Well, that was my, I had talked about that for a while, just assuming that was a satisfaction creator, and it appears it is. And now I'm curious about, I've always talked about if you do have this net expertise, your knowledge shows through, your passion shows through, your probably rate of charging your fees, whether it's hopefully value-based or something, is going to be greater. And everybody that I know that's run a niche practice said that they, Josh Lance, who I think I've talked about in the show before, he would tell me he could charge 3 to 4 times what someone else would charge because he just dealt with a niche and they were such great experts at it. People saw the value in that. So
yeah, for sure.
That's always my theory.
From what you've shared and like my own knowledge from speaking with people, I would definitely be inclined to agree. So yeah.
All right. Well, we are about out of time. And so before I ask you a couple of final questions, in fact, no, I'm going to wait on that. So first, I'm going to ask you a question everybody gets. And I know one of your answers should be that you are very happily newly married, which I know is the case.
Yes,
I know you're married. I'm sure it's very happily. And that was just last month, was it?
Yeah, it was basically a month ago from now when we're recording.
Well, congrats. And then so the question, though, is when you're not gathering all this data, analyzing and helping firms and employees, what's your outside of work passions? What do you love doing?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely like connecting with people in one way or another is huge for me. Like, whether that's golfing with friends or something, it's more about the kind of connection than it is the activity. Like I'm a very okay golf, like I'm not great. And a lot of these things, or just going to a patio or something, fitness is super important to me. I took a pretty big hit during COVID, but like finding room for that, I think like amplifies every aspect of my life. And when I'm doing these things, if I am alone and not connecting with people, I still kind of get some of that element through podcasts a lot. We've spoken about this a bit, but like, I owe a lot of things in my life to podcasting, and it's something I like genuinely really enjoy. And so you can kind of find this circle of people that you maybe don't have direct access to, but like the podcast can kind of be a proxy to it. So a lot of my interest in entrepreneurship was very much fueled by podcasts in that space and people that I can learn from. And so I'm very curious, and I think I am very much an audio-based learner. So I spend a lot of my time doing that. So yeah, those are kind of the main things. I like to do a little bit of this and that. Last night I got back into hockey for, it was like my 3rd game in 10 years. I'm hoping to get more into that again.
Nice.
Reopen that door. But yeah, just exploring things with people and activities that make you happy for sure.
Nice. And then I want to close with 2 things. One, we're going to ask for contact information, how people get a hold of you or look at this data or put in their data.
Yep.
And that's what I want to ask first. What would be your call to action to people? I mean, I'm assuming, hey, go in and fill out the information.
Yeah, absolutely. This is, again, it's a tool that is what we make of it. And so I always ask, like, if you're willing to, if you're comfortable sharing your salary data as well as a couple other things on job satisfaction, all that, it helps us find a lot of very interesting trends in the industry that I hope can help transform it. But it also help the next person who's in a similar role as you advocate for themselves, plan their career, figure out if this makes sense for them. And so I think that, again, like the more people share, the better this resource becomes for literally everyone involved in the process. So that would be greatly appreciated. And again, if you don't know what's out there as much, I would highly encourage you to go check that out. Maybe you're worth a lot more than you think, financially speaking. That actually happens pretty frequently with candidates in the pool. Someone will be like, hey, I'm looking for this. And I was like, do I have some good news for you, actually? Because if this is your expectations, I think, first of all, you need to never tell that number to anyone, and you need to spend some time in the data. So again, go get informed, free to do, free to use. So yeah, check it out. And
where is that at?
big4transparency.com. Yeah.
Got it. And if they want to connect with you or see what you're doing, a podcast or personally, what's the best places to look?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's a great place. I'm very, very active there. I try to always answer kind of any messages I get on there as well. So Dominic Piscopo on LinkedIn. I also share clips from the podcast. And so that's a good way of like, if you're kind of limited on time, like I know some people that just every week they'll listen to the episode the day it comes out. That's awesome. But for a lot of people, it'll be like, hey, 1 out of 6 podcasts are great for you. So if you're connected to me on LinkedIn, you'll see all the clips. And if something kind of, grabs your attention or is more relatable to you than some of the other episodes, maybe that's something you can get a lot of value out of. So LinkedIn's a good place. Yeah.
Well, great. Well, Dominic, it was great to have you on. I'm very intrigued by what you're doing. I think it's great. And I think I might need to have to go on and put my data in there. So
perfect. So go check out what Randy makes.
Wait, my name's not on there.
No. But I mean, yeah. Perfect. Right. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for being here. And thanks everybody for listening today.
Thank you for joining us today on the Unique CPA. You can find the show notes for today's episode and learn more about TriMerit at theuniquecpa.com. Remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star rating on your favorite podcasting app. And join us next time for more expertise and insights on the Unique CPA. ProfessionalProductions.net